Qualis has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualis VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualis. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our list of speakers, which is really long, so brace yourselves. Leslie Carhart, John Strand, Alyssa Miller, Dave Kennedy, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chinavada, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, Justin Kohler, Jay Beal, Trenton Ivy, and Ryan Cobb. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out our Rockstar lineup. Of course, I just read the Rockstar lineup, so if there's more, hopefully I didn't miss anyone. Larry, we're talking about Enzyme. Nope. We had Leonard on the show.
Yep.
Did Leonard? He didn't. I don't even think he gave a demo, right? Did he give a demo?
He did a little bit, but he didn't spend a lot of time about doing the setup and that type of stuff. He did a little demo.
Yeah, I think ours is more about like how to get the right hardware and configure it to get it up and running.
Yeah,
it's a little tricky. Some tricks in there.
Yeah. Especially, you look at some of the documentation and maybe some of the steps are out of order. Especially if you're doing it on a Raspberry Pi and you only have one terminal session, it gets a little frustrating.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, so there is. Did I put a link to this? No. Did I? No, I didn't. I need to put a link to this presentation so you can see, so the listeners at home can see this. I didn't do that. I knew I forgot to do something this week, but I will. So this will be available, much like our other technical segments, where there's a link in the show notes that links you to a PDF, either a document or slides, so you can copy and paste our commands so you don't have to recreate them on your own.
Yes.
In typical Paul Security Weekly fashion. So let's dig right into the hardware you need to get up and running, right? Enzyme's open source. Would you call it a wireless intrusion detection system? Is that how we're building it?
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So Larry and I had what I thought were very different setups. It turns out they're pretty much the same, right? I ended up switching to the Panda Wireless PAU09 N600 for $42.99 from Amazon. That one seemed to work pretty well. I had an Alpha card in there, but it wasn't quite the right one. The Panda one works good.
Yep, I originally used a PAU06, but it's only 2.4 gigahertz, so it won't do any of the 5 gigahertz stuff. I tried making it work with a set of drivers for the Alpha AC 1900, and I ended up just sort of falling down on that. Really, you just need a card that can go into monitor mode.
Yep.
But I was having pretty serious issues getting that card to do monitor mode, the AC 1900, stably.
Good to know. Not much has changed with Linux and monitor mode and wireless drivers.
And it wasn't even so much on that. I can get it to work under Linux great. It's putting Linux on an ARM platform is where the problem arises.
Yep, so, that's wonky. A lot of things don't support ARM. A lot of things do too, which is good.
Did any of the Alpha cards work? Any of the older like 36s or any of the I was trying to think of the other one, the ACH one. Yeah, the 36 ACH.
The 51NH. I specifically didn't try either the 36 or the 51NH. It's been my opinion using those cards just generally because
I was just curious if power actually was able to sustain.
Yeah, at this point, they're so old that there's parts of the newer base of the protocol that they just can't do. Like they can't do high throughput and or anything wider than a 20 megahertz wide channel. So, yeah, it's not so great. No.
Larry, now what I think is interesting is that I used the Raspberry Pi 4 8 gig kit for essentially $110. You used did you use a Pi 2 2 gig kit. Is that true?
No, it's the Pi 4 2 gig kit.
Pi 4. There's a mistake in the slides. I'll fix that. Pi 4 2 gig. Now, did you have any memory issues or notice any slowness?
Nope.
Okay. Save your money. Buy the 2 gig kit if you're going to run this then.
Well,
yeah.
He just can't remember if he has memory issues.
This is true.
Huh?
This is true. What? Huh? No, I'm glad to hear that because you can save yourself a little bit of money. I think I bought the 8 gig kit just in case I decided to do something else with it. I thought I'd rather just buy the 8 gig one. Larry, I'm sure you have so many Raspberry Pis that at this point it doesn't.
Yeah. It was funny. We were having so I've been teaching 617 this week, and we had a discussion. And they said, "Oh yeah, it's awesome. We've got a Pi," and like I started to lose them. I'm like, I am looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm looking at 17 Pis right now, like where I sit. Like
right. Every time you start a project, you just miss a new Pi.
Yep, pretty much.
Sometimes I find it's easier to do it that way, and they're not. I mean, there's a gamut of options there, but not overly expensive.
No, not at all.
There's other hardware that's listed as compatible. I think one of the only things is if you're going to buy something new, it might not be in stock. These were in stock and readily available, the ones that Larry and I used.
Yep, and I really enjoy the Vilros kits because they've got some good stuff. The metal cases with the fans and some really good power supplies and extra goodies too.
Yeah, heat sinks, fans, power supplies. The mini, is it mini HDMI? What is it? Mini HDMI to regular HDMI? Is that what it is?
Yep, mini HDMI. Yep.
I really like the metal case though. I much prefer these metal cases over the clear plastic ones.
Yep. The only thing that does kind of stink with the metal cases is that it's not easy to access the GPIO pins if that's something that you want, if you want to access it externally. There is a little teeny gap so you can pass stuff out of the case, but it's not great. But if you don't need to do that, perfect.
Software, Larry and I diverged. I've been trying to standardize, as I've said previously on the show, on Ubuntu. And I'm actually using Ubuntu for Raspberry Pi. It gives you 20.04, and my setup in all the commands that I know and love to what files to edit to set a static IP address and do basic tasks and how it's configured is the same for all of my servers, for all of my workstations, laptops, because I just use Ubuntu 20.04 because I don't know. I guess if you had different use cases, you might use a different, Linux OS. But I get great results from just using Ubuntu, both desktop and server versions, and now the Pi version, because it's all the same stuff. Like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, essentially, is what it boils down to for me. Larry, you went with something a little more standard.
Yep. Yeah, I use the quote supported operating system from Raspberry Pi Foundation. Rasbios, formerly Raspbian, from just earlier this year, running Buster. So yeah, I've had great luck with it, and just because typically tailored for the Pi, but you could have really done anything.
Yeah, I didn't notice too much different because I think I did a test it out on Raspbios, and it was like the same but different, right? Like some of the commands were different, but essentially it runs the same. Yeah.
Yep. So Paul, on one of them, and it's probably just a matter of installing a package, does Raspberry Pi for Ubuntu come with Raspi config?
I'm not sure. I think it does. Well, I don't know. I take that back. I'm not sure.
Because I know I've used Raspi config, frequently. One of the big ones, I know you had to set static IPs. I could do that with Raspi config. Enabling SPI or I2C for other projects, and super easy to enable SSH if I get to, just menu driven.
Right.
Like sometimes for me, there's motivation in just clicking a couple buttons and making something work, and I know it's going to work the proper way. As opposed to having to spend 3 hours digging into a config file. So there's something to be said for that.
I want to say OpenSSH was configured already for me in Ubuntu.
Should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Typically.
That's standard in Ubuntu. I don't need the hand holding.
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's not on the Pi because a little bit of hand-holding for other users.
Right.
And specifically that it comes with a default username and password of Pi and Raspberry, and you don't want to put that remotely accessible on a network with SSH.
Yep.
So,
so some setup and installation. This is like from my standard playbook on Ubuntu. I set the host name, and I used to edit a file called etc hostname, but now they're all fancy and use the hostname CTL command.
YAML files, yeah.
And to set a static IP, right, it's YAML files. And in Ubuntu, this was the same format as it is in Ubuntu. So like I've basically now got this committed like mostly to memory. Like I can just go in now and just edit this file, which is nice. I don't have to go look up like the different syntaxes between them. I edited the etc host file as well, and then did the net plan apply to both set a host name and a static IP address on the Raspberry Pi. And like you said, what is it? Raspconfig?
Raspi config.
Raspi config.
Raspberry config. Yeah.
Raspberry config is how you do all that on the Raspios.
Raspios.
None of this stuff I can say. Raspbian. It used to be. Why did they change the name? Out of curiosity, does anyone
I don't know.
So then I did again. I got a mistake in here. It's not upgrade and upgrade. Update and then upgrade is what it should say. And then install the prerequisites, which come from the Enzyme documentation. You get the latest version. You install the latest version, and then you set up your Postgres database. And all of that, I mean, basically those are pulled directly from the documentation. As Larry said, there's some like steps here. So the username and password that you're setting here on this slide, make sure you take a note of that because you're going to need it later. That's your database username and password. Not the same username and password for the web interface. Those are different steps.
And if you lose those, you're screwed.
Yeah. So it's a pretty basic setup, like basically set up most other servers and or install software. Very straightforward. Then I configured the wireless interface next. Larry, do you want to run through? You're more familiar with these commands than I am. I was just hacking my way through it. You run these commands way more than I do.
Well, so first IP, right? And then I run the IP command. Modern Linux distributions are removing the ones that we became familiar with, Paul. ifconfig and iwconfig in favor of IP and IW. IP to replace ifconfig and IW to replace iwconfig. Shut the wireless interface down with IP link set WLAN 0 down. Puts it in the down state, makes it unavailable for use from the operating system. Set WLAN 0 to monitor mode, and I'm not sure what the none is there.
There was some other parameter that I don't remember what it did, but the right thing is to say none. There was like another option, like set it to monitor mode, and then there was like some other option, which I don't remember what it was, but it is in fact none for that value.
Interesting. All right, and then bring it back up. I mean, I think you can even set monitor mode with it still in the up state, and it will be just fine. Okay, but and then the next command is iwdev, just gets a list of the physical interfaces and their state, and in this case, WLAN 0 is set to type monitor. Hooray! The next one you can get from IW, I think, as well. But IBW list will give you a bunch of stuff for channel information and physical interface stuff. And then Paul did some fancy command line kung fu to just get a comma separated list of the channels that are available for this device, including an extra comma at the end of 106.
Yeah, my command line kung fu is weak in this one, but it works because when you copy it, you just don't include that extra comma. I mean, I could spend time and get that extra comma off the end, right? And,
not worth it.
Yeah, not worth it.
I totally had to bust your stones because Paul, I would have taken the same approach, and I just wouldn't. I'm like, that's good enough.
Good enough. Yeah, it's good enough to get you a comma separated list, which you need to copy and paste in the config file. Yep.
Deleting one comma is less work than it would have taken me to do all of the other stuff.
Right. Yeah. And then In this step, you also need to generate a password hash for the admin interface.
Yes.
And that's right from the documentation as well.
Yes, except in the documentation, they very much have you go in and edit your file to set the password, and then say, "Oh, hey, by the way, you need to create this password by creating a SHA-256 hash from your password."
Right.
No, get the hash first.
Get the hash for. Get the list of supported channels. This is why we structure it this way, right? Put your card in monitor mode. Get a list of supported channels, and then generate the hash. Take note of that. Copy and paste it. Somewhere. That you can destroy later, because one of it's going to be your password hash, and save that information before you go to the next step. And then we get to the lovely configuration file, which isn't that bad. I mean, once you've done it, it's like, oh, it's not that bad. But there's certain things you've got to be aware of, which is why we wanted to do this segment, right? The first being, you set your admin password hash. You should also take note that your username is admin, and this is your password hash that you paste into there. Which now I realize I probably should change my password.
Too late.
This is the danger of doing technical segments with all sanitization.
So Larry, was there not a 3.8 on the Raspberry Pi OS, or
there was not. There was not. There may have been a way for me to do an apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, or to force 3.8. But 3.7 was already installed, and it does actually work with 3.7. So yeah, close enough.
Okay.
Yeah, the Ubuntu distribution came with 3.8, and the Raspberry Pi operating system, Raspbios, can never say it. I came with 3.7.
Raspberry OS. Yeah, there we go.
Raspberry OS.
So one thing to note here, Paul, because I just literally had to do it. If you're running these commands on your Raspberry Pi or under Ubuntu, and you're generating the hashes for your password and such, after you're done with that, make sure you clear your command history.
Yep.
Because I was just trying to log into my Enzyme interface, and I haven't logged into it in like 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and I couldn't remember the damn password.
I did the same thing.
But I just went and looked at my shell history, and there it is.
Yep. And make sure you remember which system that you executed that command on, whether it was a Raspberry Pi itself or some other system. I was like, wait, which machine did I execute that command on? Yeah, and then to Larry's point, I'm like, damn, I should have cleared my command history, because there it is right there. Probably not the best way, but
I've been bit by that before. Like, it reminds me of like some Mid-Atlantic CCDC competition with RFID.
I was talking about that the other day. I put it in one of my presentations.
Nice.
Yep.
Oh, is there a role other than leader?
No, leader.
Oh, I don't remember what the roles are. Oh, he explained it. No. Yes, there is lead. You can have other sensors report back up to a leader, right?
Oh, okay.
There's like a whole, because we just talked about OS query, there's a whole fleet of them, right? You can have fleets of these, and they're all collecting Wi-Fi and bringing it back into a central leader.
So we could put all those Raspberry Pis in Larry's office to some good use.
Yes, Larry could ship us all Raspberry Pis. They could collect all kinds of information, and if we sent it over the internet, right, it could all report back up to the leader. Is how Leonard described it.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
Cool.
Oh, and this file lives in Etsy, Enzyme, enzyme.conf is where that file is. Yeah. Next, you're going to set up the web interface. And in the cobbler and his children's food, shoes and eating your own dog food, we didn't set up SSL. Too much work.
Yeah. Bad. I mean, there was allegedly fairly easy to do, but
sure.
Didn't
do that. So make sure you change that to. It does say set this to an IP address. I did not try setting it to a host name and seeing if that worked. When you,
so
it's
I
interesting.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting when you set up Security Onion. It's very specific. It's like enter either the IP address or the host name that you're going to access this on, and you will only be able to access it based on the host name or IP address you enter in here. Like we're going to hard code it to what you put in here.
That's the certificate.
So I go in my local DNS server. I set up the the A record in my DNS server. I do the mapping, and then I just find it easier to remember, and it's more descriptive if I set up an actual host name, put it in DNS, and like go through those extra steps to be like, this host has this IP address and it has this host name, and that's what it's going to do, and I can keep it straight in my head because you end up with a lot of systems. So
I'm better with the IPs.
Or
I give it some clever host name. At least I think it's clever, and then it's not really that clever. And later, I can't remember what it was.
I think I called mine. And one of them was the Watcher.
And then you're just too clever for your own good, Doug. Like, what did I call that system? I know it was something clever.
And then later, we're all looking at the network, and people are going, "What does Dr. Dong mean?" You're like, I don't know. I
try and pick a theme, but then the problem is you end up with multiple themes.
I used to do that. I had that Sumerian gods, Babylonian gods,
right.
That kind of stuff. The characters from The Hobbit, the usual stuff.
Members.
Yeah, you have those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they used to do naval ships, and then you have to spell Hatshepsut. Don't ask me how I know this.
Manhattan street names.
We ended up calling John. Well, I called Johnny's new workstation. I don't think I told him yet, but I called it Mjolnir.
Oh,
is that how you pronounce that?
Thor's hammer.
Mjolnir.
Yeah.
Mjolnir. Yeah,
the hammer.
The hammer of Thor.
Because we hammered it.
Mm-hmm. No, that was a good name for that server. Yep. It's been hammered.
Raptar's hammers, you shall be avenged.
Yep. So, Paul, on this one, I struggled with this one for a little bit because you're right. You talked about you got to put this or this, and it's very specific, and we hard coded it. So I did. Oh well, it's going to be listening on localhost, so it's totally going to be 127.0.0.1.
Oops.
Yeah, and I couldn't access it. I'm like, what the. And couldn't get access to any of the interfaces, and it turns out if I'd actually tried to web browse to it from the Pi itself, it probably would have worked. But
or
no, I was
you could use SSH in a couple of different configurations to access it, and then you wouldn't need SSL.
True. Port forward SSH and use it as a proxy.
Yeah, you could do that.
No.
Or -X and just forward X and then fire up a browser off that local system and access it. That works too.
Yeah,
Tyler's shaking his head. Like, no,
and while we're at it, just do Xhost Plus. Totally fine.
That is you have to go through great lengths to turn that on now. Like Linux distributions have made it like next to impossible to be able to do that.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a good thing. Yeah, I think it definitely on purpose.
At least partially because of Tyler.
Yeah. You have to be logged in as that user in order to do the Xhost Plus thing and allow. Yeah. There's a trick to it.
It can still be done, but it's
not advised.
Not like the good old days.
SSH-X is a beautiful thing. All right. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time really talking about how you enter the IP address and how you're going to access it, but that was fun. We're going to move on to the more interesting things like configuring your 802.11 monitors. Even this is not all that, interesting or difficult, Larry, right? Like you put the device, device name, adapter name from ifconfig or IP space link. Again, as Larry said, I have config. You have to go out of your way to install now.
Yep. The interesting one thing, Paul, that I think that you did was you chose not to turn on predictable names for the wireless adapters.
Yes.
You left it as WLAN 0. I turned on the predictable ones because I could very much see plugging in a different wireless adapter, having it show up as WLAN 0, and totally not working with Enzyme and breaking it. So.
Yeah, and that's true regardless of which Linux OS you're using, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a good step. And that was an easy config to turn on predictable names, right?
Yeah, it was. It was like create a file that's empty.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, one of the system D directories.
I did do that, and I built this a couple of times, Larry. The first time on Raspberry Pi OS, and then I built it again on Ubuntu. And I think when I did it in Ubuntu, I didn't do the predictable names, probably because I looked and it was WLAN 0, and I was like, oh, that's cool. It's WLAN 0. But what you're saying is you still want the predictable names, because I could unplug and plug back in and potentially get WLAN 1 for the same adapter.
Potentially, especially if you plug it into a different port. And
Yep.
As much as I hate predictable network names, I much prefer WLAN 0, WLAN 1, and any of those types of things. It kind of makes sense.
You don't like ENP1 S0?
No.
What happened to ETH0, ETH1? What was wrong with that? We had to go to the
I don't know.
I know I don't like it because it still confuses me. I'm like, why is it not ETH0?
Right.
Yeah, like now, if it was like, if I wanted to set the status of my wireless adapter to down, I have to remember that the wireless adapter is WLX9CFD5FD1936. Like, no, WLAN 0.
Yeah. Yep. And then you
doesn't roll off the tongue anymore, does it?
Well, no, it doesn't, Lee. It's terrible. So go ahead, Lee.
I was wondering, is there any advantage to playing with the order the channels are in?
Huh.
I'm
Good
assuming it
question.
goes to the list
Because
sequentially.
in this step, you're going to paste in your list of supported channels.
Right.
Right. So, and I know where Lee is going with this. I think I know where Lee is going with this.
I think you do.
In this case, I don't think so. Because Enzyme is using the system tools to change the channel. So it's kind of slow as it is. Unlike something like Kismet, that is using direct control of the wireless card through the driver, as opposed to using system tools. With Kismet, it can actually make a difference. Because effectively what you're doing when you're doing it through the driver directly is when you're changing channels, you're setting the radio to a channel, and then you're detuning it, and then you're retuning it to the new channel, and then you're detuning it, and then you're tuning it to the channel. When you're doing it through the driver, you can actually do it much faster, to the point that Mike Kershaw, at some point during the development of Kismet, actually sat down with MATLAB to determine how fast, depending on which channel order you did it, could go from the tune to detune between those individual channels.
And here you thought your brain was fried from teaching. Thank you. That was exactly what I was doing.
Well, I kind of had the opportunity to teach that on Mondays.
There you go.
But, yeah.
And also very important to put skip enable monitor mode to true, which means that Enzyme will not try and put your card in monitor mode. It will just assume that you've done that for it.
Yeah. Assuming, of course, you did that.
Right. Otherwise, you get errors in the Enzyme log. It says, hey, your card's not in monitor mode. It doesn't actually say that, but that's how you would interpret it. Now, this is the step, Larry.
Oh, God.
It took me quite a hefty amount of time to be able to figure all this out, because there's a few things in here. So you put your channels in there twice? You put your channels in there twice. Per SSID, you put your channels in. So you put your channels in again.
I did not put my channels in again because my access points should only be active on one channel.
Right.
Maybe two if I'm doing 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Because this becomes important from a detection perspective, because now Enzyme thinks that your access point will be on any channel. So if a new access point shows up with your name on a different channel, it won't alert on it.
Right.
What about channel hopping, though?
What do you mean channel hopping for the access point?
Yeah.
How often does your access point channel hop?
Yeah. So I was confused. This is wrong. Well, this is for your SSID, though. So you want per SSID, where are all of your access points with respect to their channels? So if I've got a 2.4 gigahertz network and I've got 3 access points, one of them is on channel 1, one's on channel 6, and one's on channel 11.
Yep. Now the question is, are they all on the same SSID? Are they all on the same friendly name? And
Right.
if they are,
in my
you
case at
definitely
home,
want to.
they are, right? But Tyler, in Ubiquiti, can it auto-select? It can auto-select the channel. Actually, a lot of them auto-select the channel.
And it does based on network density. So it does that real time based on client load, network density, and neighbors.
Yeah, so maybe that's why I put that in here and just said, like, all my access points for this SSID could be on any of these channels.
Yep. See, I mean, that works, but my Ubiquiti doesn't do automatic channel selection for me.
You can turn that off. Yeah, you can turn that off.
Yeah, you can turn that off. I know Aruba does the same thing, as does Meraki.
Yeah. You list the security protocol that you're implementing, and the beacon rate is something you'll have to adjust. And
I didn't have to adjust mine.
In a previous installation, I did. Like, it kept telling me that my access points were exceeding the beacon rate, and I had to change it. And this may have changed between different versions of Enzyme. I want to say originally it was 30 was the default, and I think probably what happened is a bunch of people opened up tickets with Leonard, and they were like, hey, I keep having all these beacon rate issues, so he changed the default beacon rate to 40, and I still get beacon rate issues. So I would actually, if you've got Ubiquiti access points, I would recommend changing that to like 45 maybe. Might be a safer value, because I looked at my logs today and I was still getting some beacon. Explain why it's monitoring beacon rates, Larry. Do you know why?
I honestly don't know, and I'm not sure what that. I never figured out what that measurement was.
Larry, do you have a boom? Do you have a boom mic? Did you move your boom mic? Yep.
Yeah, sorry, it got pushed
okay.
out of the way. The little one came in saying good night for bedtime. So, while you were talking, I'm not exactly sure what the beacon rate was supposed to be measuring here. I set mine at 40, and I haven't had any beacon issues with any of it. And I have Ubiquiti stuff, so I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to be measuring.
Isn't that the query time for identifying each beacon across each channel for that SSID?
I'm not sure what that means.
But that could be why, because Paul has a lot more channels than Larry does, and that may be why the beaconing is overloading, because it's
even here at work I have 3 access points, and they're all providing the same SSID, and they're all 2.4 and 5 gigahertz.
So you have more reporting going on than Larry does, which is why his is not giving you that error, I think.
Well, isn't it how often it's polling for the beacons that are being distributed by the SSID from that particular access point on that channel?
That's what I think it is, but I'm just guessing.
Yeah, I'd be guessing too. I honestly don't know.
The documentation rate, even in the comments in the file, says you may have to adjust this. Also, when you first fire this up, Enzyme is not going to know what your BSSIDs are for all of your access points, what their addresses are, and also what their fingerprints are. So it actually fingerprints like this access point at this address or BSSID is associated with this SSID and on this particular frequency and set of channels, and then determines. I think that's how he's calculating the fingerprint.
I think there's something else in the fingerprint too, based on some header information in the beacons too, if I remember correctly.
Right, and he'll list that in the web interface for you. So what you have to do when you first fire this up is see all the alerts that you're getting and saying, "Hey, I found a rogue access point." You're like, "No, that's one of mine." Go get the fingerprint. Make sure the fingerprints align with the BSSID, and each. What we figured out was that we had 2 fingerprints, because like I set all the fingerprints and I was still seeing alerts. Each of those fingerprints are associated with the frequency. So I've got one at 2.4, one in the 5 gigahertz spectrum. Therefore, there's 2 fingerprints per BSSID. And so you only see 1 block there. I have 3 of these blocks for each of my access points.
Yep. And for the record, Paul, when we're throwing around some terms here, because I got to teach that this week too, the SSID, the BSSID, and the ESSID. So the beta SSID and the echo SSID
Yep.
those using the NATO alphabet. The SSID is the friendly name.
Mm-hmm.
The basic service set identifier, the BSSID, is the MAC address associated with the transmitter in the radio of a specific access point.
The radio transmitter. Yep.
The extended service set identifier is the MAC address associated with the SSID, the collection of access points for, in my case, like Hex of the Matrix - Unify.
Yeah.
So it's a collective for the network. Hey, I want to join this network. The MAC address for this network is, and I've got 4 access points.
Right.
But I'm close to the one in the office, so I need to send it to that MAC address because of that specific radio hardware, because of my proximity and the signal strength.
Mm.
Is that some kind of a virtual interface that is stood up by the driver?
I'm not exactly. There's a method for calculating that, and it's typically if you're adding multiple access points to it. I want to say it is derived from the other ones, from the first one.
Okay.
But I don't know that it is a virtual interface. There's actually when you look at your access point, there won't be an interface for your ESSID. It becomes strictly about some of the addressing in the air.
Okay, that makes sense. So for some of the layer 2 stuff that's happening.
Yeah, for layer 2. Yep.
And
Awesome.
just pay attention to your syntax too. When you're constructing this together, like if you're a Python person, it's like a list of dictionaries, and inside of that dictionary, there's a list or a set. I'm not sure which one that is.
The first time I set this up, Paul, I got so frustrated with this that I ended up giving up because the documentation really wasn't clear. Specifically like great BSSIDs. So then I'd have for every network, I had a separate BSSID section, and that didn't work. And then, like, can you put an address and then a fingerprint, or multiple addresses and fingerprints? And no, you couldn't. Right. So they each had to be their own very independent structured blocks under the BSSIDs list.
Correct.
So there weren't examples you could grab.
There were not examples that I could find.
For my set,
for folks running the same BSSID, the same SSID on multiple BSSIDs with different MAC addresses. Yeah, there was no examples that I could find of that.
Sweet. So once you figure that out, again, there's an example here, and I'll share these slides out in PDF format for everyone, so you can see and copy and paste and all that stuff. Just make sure you tune all these values, right? All of your values are going to be different. Your BSSIDs, your fingerprints, your SSID, your channels, your security, your beacon rate are all things that you likely have to configure. In some cases, you will have to configure. In some cases, you may have to tune it, like the beacon rate.
My suggestion, Paul, before you publish these slides, is that we update this one to show that a sample here with the BSSIDs with multiple addresses and multiple fingerprints.
Yeah, now that you say that, Larry, I think that'd be good for people to see. Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't exist elsewhere that I could find.
I think I know why you had to change the beacon rate for yours too, Paul. Based on AirWatch and client handoff for Ubiquity, that beacon rate has to be higher because of the way they do that.
Interesting.
Okay.
My title on this slide is wrong. Sorry, that was copied and pasted from a previous segment. But I did want to show, and so we'll publish an updated version of this slide deck. But the screenshot is correct. So when you go in and you look at your networks, you can see that you can see your beacon rates there. You can see your BSSID, your SSID, and your network-wide fingerprints. And if you drill down on other screens, you can also see your individual fingerprints as well that are associated with those BSSIDs. So all of that, like you're basically looking at this screen and then going back and updating the values in your configuration file. And then you can also see your networks as well, and all of the adjacent networks. So you can see everything here. I didn't want to actually publish that full list. But once you get it up and running, you can go to the networks tab. You can see all of the networks, the advertised networks, the manufacturer, the security of it all. very kind of Kismet style like list, although this is not Kismet, obviously, right? But you get a kind of Kismet style list of all the adjacent networks, as it were. Bless you.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Whew.
Bless you.
This is clearly also not creating system D services.
Yeah, the title on this one's wrong too.
I didn't even catch that last night when we were reviewing these.
It was late last night when you were reviewing it.
It was.
a long day.
After teaching all
It's a
day
long
and
day.
then studying slides for the first run of Sec 556 next week. So
You were looking at the content, not the title.
Yes.
yes,
That's like, he was like, yeah, we're like, yep, content's good. And we
Been there, done that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because who
This
reads
is
the
cool.
titles anyways?
Yeah.
So my question for you, Paul, it took me a little bit to narrow down some of my alerts.
Yeah, I can I can actually show you some of the alerts. So this is actually my running system.
Mhm.
Nice.
This is the system. It's actually not running right now. We were doing some work over by the bench, which is probably good that it's not running now because it won't show you all the like latest and greatest information from our wireless networks because it's hard to sanitize a live screen, right? So this will give you some of the historical data. So like the status now is it's down, and my guess is like the Wi-Fi adapter got knocked over and disconnected, or I need to re-enable monitor mode on it or something like that. So something happened in the system. But you'll see similar screens when you do that in metrics for what you're monitoring. If you go to alerts, yeah, see, I've got a bunch of these bandit contacts.
Yeah,
and
that's
a bandit
interesting.
is essentially like a rogue access point. Is that?
Yep, or an attack device. Yeah, it'd be interesting to
Right.
see what you've got for individual. Is it the Spacehoon Wi-Fi
Yeah.
deauthor?
Yeah. What is that? That's I can guess what that is based on the name, right? It's a deauthor.
Yep, and it's a small device based on an ESP8266 chipset or a Node MCU. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, is it? Is that the
Larry's
one?
watch.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty much. Pretty much. The interesting one that I found for that was that I got one of these error messages about a week ago for an ESP8266 deauthor, and I'm like, who went in my drawer and powered one of these on?
Yeah, I was like, wait, is Larry here? Like, I went out in the office. I'm like, Larry, are you here? Like, cool. Are you gonna hang out here and work? Like, you should do that more often, Larry. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
But
So
you
yeah,
work. So I
ended up-
I don't know what where these came from. If it's a false positive or not.
Yeah, so I ended up with some unexpected BSSID beacons
Mhm.
and some fingerprint beacons, and those were getting all the fingerprints squared away for the access points and so forth.
Yeah, I had a lot of beacon rate anomalies still.
And unexpected channel beacons. I don't remember where that came from, but it was
Yep.
one of those that I had missed a piece of hardware and like only had it half done type of thing. The one that I'm looking at now is it says multiple signal tracks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which
I don't know if I have one of those as a.
Yeah, which is this could indicate an attacker is spoofing the station, causing a different signal strength than the legitimate station. Or if there's some sort of Wi-Fi interference, your signal strength could actually change, which I think is what was happening
Right.
in my case.
Yeah, so you can. I'm sorry. You can see that a month ago I have unexpected SSID beacons, and that's because I was configuring it. Right. I hadn't told it that this was traffic actually associated with a network that I own.
I'm curious if any of the like air marshaling or air watch or any of those things do something interesting to kind of watch for that stuff.
Well,
Would be
it would show up in
surprised.
as an alert here. Like if I was adjacent to an Aruba or what was the other one you mentioned? Meraki.
There's AirWatch, Meraki. Yeah,
Yeah.
Cisco does it.
If they were doing something to protect their networks and I was in proximity in Wi-Fi in range of those frequencies, I would actually see that, I would imagine, in Enzyme.
Yep. Yep.
You
Like
should.
one of them doing IPS intrusion prevention techniques to prevent clients from connecting to.
See, that
rogue
also makes
access
me
points.
wonder if any of the things like the Amazon Ring or any of the Alexa devices where they're starting to do client isolation and stand up SSIDs for neighborhood SSID and wireless sharing crap. I wonder if any of that does anything weird.
You'd think that would get flagged because a lot of those devices go up with their own SSIDs when they're activated. So I'll bet you these things would flag all those as rogue network points unless you specifically put them in there. I would almost guarantee you'd see that stuff light up.
I'd like to know, like, honestly.
I would want it to light up because if somebody was setting up Ring doorbells in their office, I would want to know, or cameras or whatever.
It's interesting. Like my monitoring went away at around 1:00. My intern didn't get here till much later, so I can't. I mean, I could still blame him, but but 1:00 is when we started giving Johnny his new computer, and we were on that bench like messing with stuff. So like right before the show, I was looking at this. I'm like, oh wait, it's down. I'm like, oh, that makes for good talking points. Like I think I knocked something offline. Like obviously the Pi itself is running. Its network adapter is connected, so if someone didn't remove the Ethernet cable, which is what happened earlier in the week, someone had ripped the network cable out of the Pi to plug to something else because it's sitting on our bench where we belch and build computers and do projects. It's
it's in the project space. It's in the
project space. It's in the lab. So like random stuff happens in that area.
Yep.
Right.
And that's kind of interesting.
Get taken out. RAM gets SATA devices get out. Hammers come out. Like that kind of stuff on that bench. So.
And that's kind of interesting, Paul, because when I configured mine, I used the internal Raspberry Pi wireless adapter just to connect it to my network, so I didn't have to worry about a cable, and it works great.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. I mean, because that means you can put it in a spot, Larry, that just needs power. And there's lots of creative ways to power a Raspberry Pi. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to run a network cable to it.
Right.
Yeah.
As long as I can reach your Wi-Fi network or a Wi-Fi network. That works.
And I will say, I am extremely impressed with Enzyme and its ability to run really well on a Raspberry Pi. Like I haven't noticed any like lagginess or like high CPU or power drain on the... I don't get messages in Linux that say that, I'm straining on power or anything like that if you're not using a wall work kind of thing, right?
Now, is this the only app you're running on that Pi, I'm assuming? Someone asked if you could run something like Pi-hole on it in conjunction.
I would say yes.
Yeah, I mean, you might want the one with more RAM. I would recommend if you're going to do that. But, again, kind of super impressed just how lean this is running.
Looking at mine, Paul, I'm SSH to mine right now, and it's doing its thing. And running top, the load average is 0.32, 0.30, 0.36.
So it's very lean.
It's barely touching the CPU. It's like 2 to 0.6% use.
It's pretty amazing how much compute power is in these little Pis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Especially the 4s.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's interesting, Paul. I think that for me, I think that Enzyme still struggles a little bit with some of these networks that it's finding. Mm-hmm. So if you could look at your network tab and take a look and see if there's anything unusual there.
Oh yeah, because it's not.
Oh, it's down.
It's not.
Down. Yep.
Yeah, running right now.
Yep. So I've got some that there's like some Fire TV devices. Which are interesting because it has some not human readable content in it in the SSIDs. So I don't know what the deal is with that. Also, if I remember correctly, I have a WPA3 enabled network because it's called Hacks for the Matrix WPA3, and I could have sworn I had it enabled for WPA3. For some testing, but it's being discovered as WPA2. And I know Leonard was having some discussions about making sure WPA3 was identified properly. It may also be in backwards compatibility mode, so that would be legitimate that's the case. But I've got one network that shows up around my house, and I think I know what it is. Back in the day when they came and installed a Verizon Fios, they dropped off this piece of shit Action Tech wireless router, and they all came enabled by default with WEP. Yeah, WEP. And this wasn't all that long ago. And I need to have this thing on my network because it's the part that bridges between Ethernet to the cable TV network for Mocha, so that all my set-top boxes can get program and guide information, so it knows what to record when. So the first thing I did was went in and turned, I want to say I turned the Wi-Fi off completely, and also disabled WEP and put something else on it. But this network still shows up billing as an Action Tech router, and currently it says it has no encryption. Yet if I try to connect to it, it tells me that it needs like a WEP key or a WPA2 key and won't actually connect as an open wireless network.
Is that your neighbor's device, or do you think that's your device?
I think it's mine. I really do.
Think it really doesn't disable the wireless when you disable wireless in that firmware, and the firmware's kind of wonky? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, considering that thing has been running and only doing that quote Mocha pass through pretty much since the day we installed it, and we've been in this house 7 years. The device is 7+ years old.
It's why I just converted everything to YouTube TV.
Yeah, probably a smart idea.
So some troubleshooting, Larry. Var log enzyme, enzyme.log is where you want to go. Now this log, Larry, from what I can tell, is information about the enzyme running service itself and does not contain any of the Wi-Fi analytics and or logging.
Correct. Yeah, it's all about the service itself and the connectivity to the wireless adapter. Excuse me, and so forth. So like systemd log output type of stuff.
Right. And so you had some. So what I gleaned from this log, and you gleaned something different, right? I saw messages like if your card's not in monitor mode, it'll complain very loudly about that and give you messages, and you'll read it and go, "Oh, my card's not in monitor mode, so I need to go flip that back into monitor mode." You actually got some different messages as well.
Yeah, I did. And part of the reason why I started looking here is because all of a sudden I'd get some data in Enzyme, and it would run between 15 and 30 minutes. And then it would say, nope, no wireless adapter connected. And I could clearly see that there was a wireless adapter connected, but it couldn't use it. And it was in monitor mode. And it was bad. Because like I'd get 15 to 30 minutes worth of data, and I'd unplug the card and plug it back in, and all would be working again for 15 to 30 minutes. But turns out what I was getting in the Enzyme log was this error message that we've got on the screen here about the RT2X00 USB vendor request. Vendor request 07 failed for offset blah, blah, blah with error -110. And I couldn't figure anything out what the hell was going on. But to me, what this made sense for was remembering back in the day when we used to use the AWS 051NH wireless adapters that were very, very power hungry. You'd plug that into your system and it wouldn't get enough power, and you'd do something on Wi-Fi, and next thing you know, you had a kernel panic because there wasn't enough power to do the operation. It would just send garbage back to the driver and to the kernel and crash your system. Turns out it was in fact related to power. Because I had my wireless adapter plugged into one of my USB 3 ports on my Raspberry Pi version 4. And I remembered back that when I first started using the 4, I had plugged a keyboard into the USB 3 port, and it just didn't work. Like I couldn't type on the system, and you name it. So I plugged the keyboard into USB 2 port, and all of a sudden it started working. So I started Googling why keyboards don't work on USB 3. And turns out there's still some issues with the true USB 3 capability and compatibility on the Raspberry Pi version 4, some related to power. And sure enough, I unplugged my wireless adapter from the USB 3 port, plugged it into a 2, and it's been up ever since.
That's amazing. a quick story on that note. So, we're talking about a very small computing device with the Raspberry Pi. This problem can extrapolate out to your really expensive MacBook Pro, your Windows computer, or your Linux computer. My computer is a build that I did that has like 256 gigs of RAM and a Threadripper AMD processor on it. And I was having similar issues with USB. And the issues can be a combination of both power and USB bus speed. And similar to your story, Larry, right? And when you're doing these kind of projects, making sure that you've got the right USB devices plugged into the right ports that correspond with the right bus that have the right power requirements. I had to put my HDMI capture device, my which connects to my camera, my USB DAC, and I have multiple ones, my keyboards, my speakerphone. And so what I did was I did LS USB. And I saw like these devices are plugged into bus 1 and I have bus 1 all the way through 9. And like I created a file that was like this bus corresponds to these physical ports on my system. And I make sure that I basically manually load balance my bus in power. And so if I've got a hub, I make sure it's powered. And there's differences in the hubs and how they power. Oh, I can't remember now, but I got like really deep into, whether the hub shares a bus or has multiple buses or power. There was some moniker for the hub. It was like a type X versus a type Y kind of hub, and how it distributed power. And I wish I could remember what that was, but I kind of got really deep into USB troubleshooting, because what would happen is my computer would boot up, and some days like I'd be fine using Teams and using my headset and my camera, and then like later in the day it would just stop working, and it was totally friggin' random. And that was one of the issues that I had. Once I balanced power and bus speed, things were 90% better. Then it was left up to the application, and how the application, like Microsoft Teams on Linux, is a flaming turd. And if that started up first, it would like try and use the USB bus, and through some like weird driver thing in the application, it would bork all my audio devices. So what I did was I told Linux, don't start up Teams when you start the system, and everything would boot up just fine. And now actually I can start up Teams, the client, and be better. Even though it's a flaming turd, it's still better. But I end up, using a browser to do my Teams calls. I can use Zoom, I can use Skype, I can use all these applications. And in Linux, it actually is working really well with my camera and all my audio devices. But that's very similar. If you're doing this stuff with Wi-Fi cards and USB, your exercise that I went through is going to be pretty similar.
Yeah, and similar type of thing. Corinne, our oldest daughter, comes downstairs to me the other day and says, "Daddy, that totally awesome custom keyboard we built together. Because I got on a roll last year. Like none of the lights are working. Like it doesn't make my awesome rainbow stuff.
My keyboard's doing the other thing too.
It doesn't do the rainbow stuff anymore. And like I have my instruction manual, and I tried to set it and it doesn't do anything. So I went upstairs and looked, and I'm like, what did you change? He says, I plugged in my USB mouse to charge it over there. And I unplugged the mouse, and the lights start working again. I'm like, let's rearrange these things for some better power distribution.
I did that too. Because it's a drop control and with the lights on it and everything, and it's USB-C. And I needed to plug something else in USB-C, so I ran my keyboard from USB-C to USB-A is the standard one, right?
USB-A is the one that you have to flip over 3 times to get it in, right?
Yeah, so I did the USB-C to USB-A and plugged it into a hub, and my keyboard worked, but the lights weren't working. It wanted to be connected via and what I found was on the motherboards, one of the USB buses that's associated with Type-C, it's like a USB 3.2 Gen 1 or Gen 2 will typically be the ports that has a Type A port and a Type-C port, and those are on their own bus. Those 2 ports is what I found. Pretty standard on Asus. Both Asus motherboards I was working with were pretty standard about that. So.
Yep. But yeah, I feel your pain, and I also feel your pain with keyboards from Drop and others. It's kind of hard to see in the dark right now, but right over my right shoulder here, there's a bunch of, some darkness and some black, because that's 4 keyboards from Drop in addition to the 2 that are already on my desk. Oops. I have a problem.
But folks have those issues with a lot of different hardware and software, Mac OS and Windows alike. So like those USB problems just don't seem to want to go away. So
yeah, USB power is a train wreck, and I get why it is a train wreck, and it's for some of the same reasons why in the Sans Wireless course we include a powered USB hub, because you think about the USB 2 standard, which we were often dealing with. There, in the olden days, Paul, when we were using those cards, like you could plug it in, it would be just fine, and it would suck all the power it needed, because no one cared that the USB spec said 500 milliamps per port and 1,000 milliamps per bus, and the wireless adapter would suck 1,500 milliamps from one port, and like it didn't care. But then what started happening is that you start doing that and your battery life goes to shit in your laptop. And everybody starts complaining to the manufacturers, you promised me 6 hours and I got 1. So they said, well, fuck all y'all. We're going to make these USB ports conform to the spec because that's what's killing it. And broke all sorts of shit. We're going to follow the rules so we don't get sued. For other reasons.
There's a couple of references. The installation documentation from Enzyme is pretty good, as well as I link to setting a static IP address on Raspberry Pi. Of course, you can Raspberry config and or edit the files behind that, and that's going to differ depending on which Linux distribution that you're using. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
Good discussion. With that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned.